Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a special Friday edition of Top Voice Tuesday. We are back with Nick Larson to talk about the future of the startup world. And we're on a Friday because, and Nick, I want you to tell this story after you do your intro of what happened when we tried to do this on the actual Tuesday. Because it really truly is one of those Murphy's Law kind of moments. But
Just smooth
uh,
sailing.
just smooth sailing for sure, for sure. So before we get in, for those of you on the call live, please do leave a question. Let us know where you're dialing in from. We like to take questions or comments along the way. And of course, this episode is going to be running on our podcast platforms now that Top Voice Tuesday is up and running as a full podcast, and we're excited about that. So let's dive into this conversation, Nick. Tell us who you are, tell us what you do, and how did you get to the top of the Top Voice Mountain?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. Big fan of the show and everything that you built. So I run a podcast, but my background is as a revenue leader in technology. So mostly small business, and so that's been a pretty cool journey. At my core, though, I feel like I connect, I amplify, and occasionally invest in what we call the best brains, or really smart founders. And so integrity is super important to me. I love stories. I love storytelling. You probably have had a similar experience where it's this modality, this vehicle has given you front row seats to some pretty fascinating people, including
Absolutely.
the General David Petraeus episode, which I watched and it was just floored by. That was so cool. You
Yeah.
handled that like a pro. So
Oh, I appreciate that.
I was taking notes.
It's certainly a pinch me once in a lifetime kind of moment, and you were the episode before that we had to cancel, and we'll get to that story. But I appreciate the
Yeah.
comment.
For sure, for sure. So I mean, I love meaningful work and meaningful relationships, and so this has been a pretty neat way to explore my fascination with technology and people, and then also have impact. So now Silicon Zombies is in the top 5% of Spotify, and we've got a pretty strong following. We're in over 80 countries. I mean, started in my my then girlfriend, now wife's living room in Colombia. But we'll get to that. The pandemic was a weird time, but I think kind of like launched a lot of content creators and gave a chance to kind of dip their toe in those waters. But I wasn't I was aware of the Top Voice community, and it always just kind of felt out of reach, I guess you could say. So when I got the email, it was like Christmas. I ran to Sandra. I was like, Sandra, oh my god, I got this thing, and I knew that it was going to be impactful. Um, just kind of from a visibility perspective, but I didn't realize how many friends that I would make from it,
Hmm.
including Nikki Estes, who's a great mutual friend of ours. And so aside from the podcast, we also, my wife and I, host a yearly longevity summit called the Ageless Evolution. In fact, it's coming up in like 34 days or something like that, October 10. And it would have been a disaster last year if it wasn't for Nikki. So she really helped out a lot. And in fact, it is a community effort. But yeah, it's just really pleased to be here, and excited to share the stage with you, Michael.
I appreciate it, and I'm sorry I can't make your event. We have a life event of our own coming up, so we need to be present for that.
Okay.
So let's talk about this conversation on the sort of the startup world and the shifting nature of how AI has impacted it. So you've obviously been in many startup cycles. What's different about this time, if anything, especially in the world of AI?
Yeah, there does seem to be this does seem to be like kind of a unique chapter, right? Like I don't think anything that's happening right now is like normal per se, but definitely speed. Um, and like the rate of innovation seems to be increasing. And then also like democratization. I think traditionally when we get innovation, it's come from either like government or big business, and that's kind of like top down. But 2022, when ChatGPT hit, and I guess that was kind of the fruit of the transformer white paper that came out. I guess it was DeepMind with Google in 2017.
Yeah.
But when 2022 hit, man, everybody got to have a bite at the apple. So like the innovation started coming from the bottom up, which is kind of a democratization of tech from my perspective. So I would say the speed of innovation seems to be increasing, democratization, and then also like the importance of distribution. So I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily AI. I think this has coincided with artificial intelligence, but the shift from legacy media to to kind of more unique channels like podcasts and content creators like
Yeah.
yourself. So those seem to be a pretty pretty big pretty big changes in how things are shifting, right?
Yeah, I'm curious about the last one. I want to talk about all of them, but I'm curious about the last one. How does this? We certainly know in the world of like politics and socially how the podcast experience and non-traditional media has impacted information flow and just the kind of the world of commentary. How has it affected the startup world? What's different about it?
Um, well, to me, trust is the most important thing that a brand can have, and large brands, I think it's difficult to kind of convey that. I mean, historically, there was that foundation that they had that they could build on top of. But I think that like when you look at a content creator or these kind of new methods of driving products and services and sharing information, those individuals are much, I would say, much more likely to to be honest because it's their reputation. And again, like
Mm.
reputation's everything. I was in an event just last night, and there was, I knew a handful of the folks there, which kind of helped the social dynamics of things, you could say, because of like consistent credibility. So like as a startup, or I guess as a startup and a content creator, you you don't need to hit a grand slam every time, but if you're just constantly, getting base hits, or you mentioned the the lightning story on the football field, right? If you're constantly moving the ball down the right direction, people know they can trust you, and so I think that's a really important element of getting customers. And frankly, revenue solves all problems. That was kind of my mantra, actually, as a revenue leader from a startup perspective. And I've got a whole host of failures in the past, but and a couple wins. But that was kind of our north star. Um, so what about yourself? How are you looking at this?
Well, it's interesting as you were saying that. I'm thinking about the founder role that I know a lot of investors. You look at the product. I'm going to assume you've been in more of these cycles than I have. You look at the product, you look at the platform, you look at the potential, but you're investing in a person who you believe in, that has not just the vision but the talent and the ability to bring that vision to life. So does more access to founders in these kinds of forum help you build that trust? Is that kind of what you're saying in terms of just getting to know the person you're investing in a different way?
I, I would say for sure, definitely. And it's funny you mentioned. So essentially pivots, right? So we had Mike Maples Jr. on a couple months ago, and he said 85% of his returns. He's like a very prolific, like one of the top early stage tech investors. He said 85% of his returns come from pivots. So staying really close to the customer problem, having domain expertise, but also it does seem like, and this is just kind of my personal experience, but it feels like the model has flipped, where historically you find a problem you want to solve, you create a product or a service, and then community builds organically around that. It almost feels like now you can maybe either do the two in conjunction or start with the community, because once you know the people and there's that relationship, then you can understand their needs, their challenges, and create a product or service around that. And your conversions will be higher, your LTV will be higher, your customer acquisition costs will be lower. So it just seems like there's like a lot of positive downstream effects. And Michael, to your earlier point of how the whole market is shifting, Dario Amodei, I think it was Dario from Anthropic, said that we're going to see the first $1 billion solo founder, which is crazy to me. But I guess with the introduction of agents and these models that are becoming far more efficient, like ChatGPT 5 is like 86% more efficient than GPT 4,
Yeah.
then we're seeing a kind of a unique shift in the market where you can do a lot with a lot less. So those seem to be kind of like the general buckets of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. So let's talk about that piece because I've seen several articles recently. I know there's been some folks that have left OpenAI to go start their own platforms, and there's different reasons for that. And I think some of it is vision, some of it's safety, some of it's maybe seizing the moment. How
Sure.
much how much overreaction, how much of a bubble maybe is being created? I've seen people that have hit, billion-dollar valuations or something like that, and it's just a couple of folks that have just moved on. They're sort of betting on the potential of people that were in maybe a bigger ecosystem like OpenAI. Is there an overreaction happening in some cases, or is this all valid?
Man, that's a great question. So Sam Altman seems to think so. However, he's kind of heavily steeped in the politics, and he's also raising a round, and the new round is valued at like $500 billion, which is kind of insane. So, I mean, it seems to me that maybe there's a small correction in the market, um, or these valuations, and I think that that was partially from that MIT article that came out recently.
Yeah,
I think that that article is largely baloney. Reason being is the adoption of technology and the efficiency gains, because there's really, like, as I see, kind of like two buckets. There's like the efficiency workflows, and then there's opportunity that you can yield from these new models and implementing. But I think the biggest challenges has been from a lack of I think the lack of return on investment across corporate, because that's kind of like how they're measuring these things, has been from lack of proper training, and just trying to, it's kind of like an old euphemism, but like, trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. Oh, I think I reversed that, but
square peg in a round
yeah,
hole.
that's
There you go.
that's what I mean to say. So once organizations are able to train their team better, and that's what they're asking for, then they're going to feel more confident with AI. They're going to be able to start using it. They're going to be AI native, and there's frankly is like some pretty simple practices to start implementing these in your daily workflow to be more efficient. So I mean, did you see like granted, this is just kind of like video and image editing, but I don't know if you saw the Gemini 2.5 flash release, the Nano Banana, which is a pretty
Yep.
cool name.
Yep. Yep.
That's shocking, right? Like that could be potentially like the Photoshop killer. So it feels like we're in like a really unique time. Um, are you using? I'm sure you're using it daily, right? Is it up in a screen? What models are you using? It feels like it's getting better. At least
Yeah.
that's kind of my impression.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to answer your question, but I have another question for you before I
Sure,
get to that because
sure,
you
sure.
you sparked something that's I think interesting in the model of the traditional. Maybe this is unfair to say. The traditional startup experience was I come up with a product idea, I innovate around that idea in some way, shape, or form. I build a small team. We get seed money for that. The investors see that as an opportunity to disrupt the market. But ultimately, I'm trying to go be acquired some way, in some
Mhm.
way, shape, or form. There's obviously the Facebooks and the Googles and all they've started their own thing, but I'm building something because I want to get bought.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there's more opportunity now to not to disrupt and steal revenue and steal customers from big companies that are still struggling to become really AI native. I mean, they're using AI in ways to remove work, but not necessarily to disrupt markets. Is that a fair statement? And if it is, what does it change for the way founders and teams think about getting into the mix now?
Yeah, I think that is fair, just because these older companies, they're just, they're just so heavy, right? Like, how can you look at Salesforce, for example? They've got a bunch of executives that essentially expect, $250,000 bonuses, $1 million bonuses. And so if you can go in and solve the same problem, which, I guess in that specific context it would be customer relationship, or, kind of managing that first touch to sale. um, and you can just do that in a far lighter way, then you're going to win. I mean, assuming you can get in front of the customer, and that the first question there is like, well, where are my customers, and
Right.
how do I reach out to them, because there's a lot of noise, right? And there's a lot of distractions. In fact, on my whiteboard, I've got the words relentless prioritization, because it does seem like there's constant there's constant distractions. It's one of the reasons I love to go for a surf, because I can't take my phone out. It's just kind of like meditative. So yeah, I think, on one hand, I would agree with that, but on the other, once these, and I'm not sure how this is going to hit the market, but if AI is essentially able to start eating the um, into the talent, right? And start, I guess I don't want to say replace, but kind of maybe augment, and in some case replace um, humans. Um, those organizations are going to start to see incredible ROI, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this shifted. We all have the image of, if, we watch the movie The Social Network and you hear about the beginning of Facebook and everybody's renting a house, they're in a room, they're working 20 hours a day, everybody's grinding. That experience has shifted now because work can happen without me doing a lot, having agents. So how does that change now the relationship between founders and investors in terms of expectations of speed, expectations of how much money do you really need? We're not paying a bunch of people here.
Sure.
We don't. Who are we dishing out equity to? There's nobody here to do that. How has that changed the relationship of that founder investor side?
My friend John, I was just chatting with him a couple days ago. He runs commercial at a company called True Binding. And these guys have raised like over $250 million. They're solving Alzheimer's and dementia. They're really this is like fascinating company. He told me that he wishes he had multiple computer screens, because he's using the $200 version of ChatGPT or whatever, and he's giving prompts to these things, and it could take like 5, 10, 15 minutes for the top version of the model to process and spit something out. So it is strange that the that the yield that you're getting is so strong, but it does seem to be like very compute heavy. But things are improving, and there's downstream impacts of all that as well. Um, and it kind of like quickly gets into politics as well. So, like, what are the what chips should we be selling to China, and what are the implications of that? And you're probably familiar that China's going from, like, I think 3 to 6 terawatts, and we're going from like 2 to 3. So yeah, there's a lot of. I used to kind of be ambivalent about politics, but now it just does kind of seem like a little bit more. They say, like, you may not care about politics, but politics cares about you, right? So there's like very real implications. I mean, did you? I'm curious. Did you get into any of that with General Petraeus and the implications around national security and AI? I'm curious.
We didn't. He made it very clear that he stopped voting a long time ago, and that was part of his role. And he said that was actually pretty rare. because he didn't want to be seen in any
Partisan.
orientation. And
Yeah.
of course, nowadays things are quite polarized. But I think you raise a great point around the ecosystem. So let's talk about that, because I think in the early days of the dot com boom, these kinds of macro dynamics weren't really on anybody's mind. It was about, how do I create the platform and the technology and build the market? And now, of course, we're in a very different spot.
Yeah.
So,
Simpler times.
how does that change the choices that either founders or investors are making? Is it leaning people in different ways around what they're choosing to invest in? Is it raising expectations? Is it increasing risk? All of the above?
Well, historically, I think if you had a really cool product and it was super unique, like that was a sufficient moat. But now, if technology is itself democratized, which is like such a weird idea, like if you can essentially recreate all of Airbnb, which at the time was like a huge innovation, right? It kind of flipped the entire model because of like a unique insight, and they weren't incrementally better. They were like truly different, and that's what it investors want to see. But I think back to the point of like self education. So if techno you got to continually improve how you can best leverage the most cutting edge tools, and that itself will be a moat, I would say. And also like access to data. Like if you've got unique access to data that can provide a better answer or a better product or a better service in some capacity, because again, back to my friend John, like we're kind of turning into agent managers,
Right.
which is a weird thing. But the sooner we all kind of get more comfortable with that shift, is like we don't have to do the work, so to speak, but we can manage technology that is doing the work, and then we synthesize it and present it. So in some way, I almost feel like we're getting back to like a more human element in that capacity. So yeah, I
So,
mean,
so
yeah,
does this change the? We had the traditional definition of a unicorn, and every investor, of course, is chasing the illustrious unicorn, and they understand the rate at which those investments are happening. They're called unicorns for a reason, because a lot of
mm,
things don't
sure.
don't make it to market. Does it change the definition of what a unicorn is going forward, if I don't need to be the one that comes up with the idea and I can let agents do it on my behalf? I mean, what changes there?
I don't think that the failure rate of startups will meaningful. I mean, it may deviate a little bit, but my guess is that'll return. That'll return to that kind of, it's a rarity, of course, for these things. Well, let me back up a little bit. I think we'll end up seeing a lot of smaller companies that have their own niche. So, going from, like, for example, my mom worked at Apple for 30 years. My dad worked at Lockheed Martin for 30 years. I don't think we're gonna see that. I think in the future, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible about this, and kind of take myself out of the equation, but I think we're gonna see a lot of micro influencers, or folks whose voice increasingly matters, because I think we're going to get away from these much larger organizations, and I don't know what the impact on venture will be. Like maybe it's just not as necessary. Um, like traditionally investors, I'll say like specifically venture capitalists, because angels are kind of in a different ball game. But you find them, you scale them, you sell them, and if the amount of capital needed to create a product or service that is meaningfully different, like not just incrementally better, but meaningfully different from the other players in the market, then maybe that's just they're going to be not as needed. I don't know. It's a strange. It's a strange dynamic that we're seeing, right?
Yeah, there's these second order effects in other elements of the ecosystem, where now the way you place your bets, where you place your bets, the size of that bet that you're placing, and how, and there's, look, smart people, yourself included, that spend time in this world who will know how to adjust. It just occurs to me that perhaps, the earlier innovations were about creating a platform, but if we all have the ability to leverage this lake called AI, where we're all drawing from the same information, and so how does that then change the way in which we think about the opportunity in there? And we could get even more existential. We talked to Corey Warfield, and he's talking about not even needing money at some point, right?
Wow.
Universal basic income. And
Man,
what does this mean down?
Corey's a rock star.
Yeah,
Actually, can we chat about that real quickly? So, like,
sure.
the universal basic income thing is fascinating. So I'm a libertarian, so I generally believe like smaller government is better, just because for example, like the income tax when it first came out, I think it was 1904 or something like that. It was only for the top 1% or 2% of people, and it was a very small fraction, and it's just kind of quickly, like over 100, you know,
It's
plus
quick in the
years.
grand scheme of things.
Yeah, exactly. Has kind of eroded the utility and spending power that we have, um, in society, which is not a good thing, right? I believe in, access. I believe in the ability for people to kind of make their own decisions, and then let the market kind of correct. So, just to build on the universal basic income thing, I do think that there will be some kind of government body or some kind of regulatory vehicle to manage. So, if are you familiar with the Gini coefficient?
Mm-mm.
It's the measure of wealth income distribution. So, the U.S. is not great, but it's way better than like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is like neither democracy or a republic. So, if a lot of people are doing not great, then that means like the wealth is not evenly distributed. Like, some of the Scandinavian countries are pretty, doing pretty good. Switzerland, I think, is generally speaking pretty good at this. So, um, if this new chapter of AI is going to create insane amounts of wealth and prosperity, which I believe it will, then that needs to be shared, right? Because but you don't want to disincentivize people in such a way where they're just going to kind of like sit on their rear and not do anything meaningfully impactful to society. So maybe there's some way we could gamify that where you get X if you do Y. Maybe it's like, planting gardens in your community, or being part of like a big brother big sister program, or this is kind of how I'm thinking, like, if instead of just a check, if the government could give universal basic compute. Have you heard anything about this? Is kind of
I've heard
like,
about that a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
This is the same concept about internet access and everybody having the same access to tools, which I think what you're describing, and interestingly, maybe to tie this to our conversation, is perhaps these are the next big innovations that AI and the startup world can address. Because before it was, can I find the best use of technology to solve a market problem? And what I think many of these, I just listened to a podcast yesterday about the impacts of AI on unemployment and where we're headed. And,
wow,
it's not getting better, because if I
right,
don't need
right,
people
right.
to do things, right, what are we left with? And these are massive existential questions, but
but
maybe
but
in
but
the
but may,
startup
but maybe people use AI to do things for themselves, and I think that's kind of where we're shifting. I
world.
Hopefully,
Yeah,
right?
and I think maybe this is part of, if you're a founder or thinking about starting a company, or how you use AI, you used a word at the beginning, which is the democratization of resources and access, that now, maybe there's a person somewhere that never would have had the opportunity to start a company, because they didn't have access to the communities that you play in, but now they can, and they can create something that's entirely different. And so I think that's a great kind of way to sort of summarize. And so, Nick, I'd love for you to, for the average person who's listening to this conversation, what are the two or three things that they should take away from the next horizon of the startup world, and what's happening with AI, and how they should think differently about it?
Well, Well, so if we think of like artificial intelligence as like on demand intelligence, that means we can learn about literally anything we want for free, and it can even be personalized. So I think the education system is going to be kind of severely kind of changed, but that's a whole nother conversation. So I would say that the importance of self education and the importance of building your own brand, and then finding something that you're passionate about. So like having a deep domain expertise, I think is a good idea, but maybe several domain expertises that can intersect. So I mean, this is kind of an older example, but a friend of mine who's he's one of the executive producers in Call of Duty, like the video game. He's also a musician and a DJ. So he ended up bringing this group called the Ministry of Sound to his friends in the computer video game place or industry rather. And then that was like a really he got to carve his niche at the intersection of these two things. So
Wow.
so maybe folks who are, like you said, like this old model, um, it's not, I don't think it's going to work. But the good news is like if we're curious and stay in a place of wanting to solve unique problems with cool people, that's a great space to be. I look at business as a vehicle, not just to solve problems, but to work with people that you dig. You know,
Yeah.
and in fact, Simon Sinek says that the value of people working collectively as a team to solve a problem and feeling like they're having an impact is just as important as the work that gets done as well. And there's so many new innovations like in science and for example, like Ozempic, this was a um, an innovation that they learned from the Gia monster, which is like a kind of a crazy looking animal, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, that's kind of like a good example of biomimicry. So, let's get inspired by nature and let's take these learnings and apply them in a lab or in business, and create a really meaningful story around that.
I love
I
that.
think, yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? Where we're headed?
Well, I think it's a unique time to solve problems in ways that we couldn't have imagined just a few years ago. And I think the questions that you're raising, which actually dovetails into the question that is your bonus question, as we have to kind of wrap up our
Mm.
time, and we can both address this, but it's the question of whether or not you believe technology and AI is negatively impacting humanity. What's your perspective on that?
I I think that I'm a techno optimist. So I think as a sum total, it will have a positive impact on humanity, but it's our responsibility, like in a crisis, we need to lean on courage, and we can be courageous when we have principles. Um, Actually, speaking of principles, there's a book by Ray Dalio, who the very introduction of the book says time is like a river, and it moves us forward to face reality, and in doing so, we make we make many decisions. Not all of them we're aware of, right? But so when we make those decisions, that's all predicated on our principles. Like what do we hold dear? And when we know what we stand for, we'll make better decisions that we're more in alignment with.
Yeah.
And when you make decisions that weren't when we're in alignment with, then you're going to feel better because your actions reflect who you are. I heard that confidence is showing the world you are who you say you are, and because of that consistency, um, you'll just end up showing up better, and then you'll feel more confident. So like that kind of momentum begets itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a hell of a question. I
Yeah. We
hope
could.
I hope it's going to turn out for the good.
Yeah. I think we are in a moment that we collectively perhaps didn't anticipate it moving as quickly as it has. And I agree with you. I tend to be optimistic. The more I talk to people like you, the more I do this show, the more I listen to other podcasts, there's definitely a fork in the road coming. And
Yeah.
I think, the truth is that the average everyday person doesn't get to choose many of those big forks, but there's some people that are putting us at the front end of that I think I hope our values lead us to a place. The arrival of superintelligence, which is not far away, depending on the choices we make, I think could
Yeah.
be. It's going to drastically change what we experience in our
Yeah.
lives on a daily basis, and I'm hopeful and optimistic, like you are, that choice will lead us down a good path. But um,
It is kind of crazy, right? It feels like in a world where everything's changing so quickly, like the biggest risk that you could take is not taking any risk at all. And there will be a lot of wealth to be generated. Like even in the last 10 years, we've gone from 500 billionaires to 2,500. So the opportunity is out there. Just like stay passionate, stay curious, like as stay hungry, as Steve Jobs likes to say, and we'll all get there together. That's my goal.
Yeah, what a great way to wrap up a really interesting and multidimensional conversation. Nick, where can people find you beyond LinkedIn, and anything you want to offer up to people listening? I know you've got your longevity conference. Where can people find you to learn more?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for that. If you do a search for, I almost said a Google search, but I'm not sure anybody uses regular Google searches anymore. Silicon Zombies is our live show. So siliconzombies.com. We're also on Spotify and yeah, very excited for the Ageless Summit. You'll be missed, Michael, but 2026, I'm sure we'll get you there.
I will be there. I will be there. Nick, thanks again. Thank you for coming back around and doing this on a Friday, and for everyone tuning in or listening on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for being part of Top Voice Tuesday. These conversations just keep getting better, and we're excited to keep going. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you soon.